you first set up vSTARS, this is the first screen that's going to come up. This is your list of facilities that you have available. So when you first install it, it will probably be empty, and you'll go over to the right hand and click Import. For example, here's the sector files that we have. These are all of the vSTARS facilities here. So you'll select the one you want to import. I'm going to import Medford. I don't think I have it, and it'll show up on the list here. The one, you'll just double click on it. And so when you come in here, the first thing you'll probably want to do is go to your settings. So you'll do Control and S. And there are several things in here. Some of the helpful ones are the show all of the positions in your sign-on list. If you check this, they'll all show up. If you don't, only ones that are kind of adjacent to you will show up. So that kind of helps declutter things. There's this show display control panels. So we'll enable that for now. That's your sidebars here with all of the knobs and buttons on them. And you can set your aircraft select key here. And network, you're going to have all of your network connection settings and your controller info. One thing that's nice, that's different from VRC, you can set your observer call sign, and there's a way to sign it as an observer specifically, so you don't have to change that. And you got your audio settings. Mostly don't need them right now since it's not built in with the audio for VATSIM, but I will use it for notification sounds and stuff, and you can set your push to talk key. And then it has a flight strip functionality as well. There's lots of settings in here for when flight strips are added and deleted. And the other main settings window is under Control and F. And this is going to let you know this is really intended for facility management, and some of the stuff you could mess things up if you don't know what you're doing. There are a few things in here that you might find interesting. There's the visibility range. So you can use vSTARS to control tower, and if you're going to do that, you'll want to come in here and change your visibility range to something appropriate for tower. And another one is the positions and aliases. Should be set up by importing the profile, but if you've got some custom alias file that you want to import, you can do that here. And then lastly, the video maps. This is the list of the different maps that are available, and interesting thing here is the group. So when you set your brightness of different maps and vSTARS, it's going to be by group A and group B all together. So this is where you could figure out which maps are part of which group and adjust that if you want to. So to sign on in vSTARS, the shortcut is F12. And it'll tell you sign on, and it'll have the position name that you've set and your network settings, and you can backspace and type in a different name if you want. If you do Control and F12, it'll automatically put in your observer name and sign you as an observer instead. And so I'm going to sign on here, I think. Double check in my settings. I've set it to Sweatbox to use for this training. And to know you'll sign on, the part here will say OK, OKNA in green, and when you're offline, it'll have been in red there. So the controls to navigate here are pretty similar to VRC. Scroll to zoom, and then right click and hold to pan around. And around the outside of the screen here, you'll see the vectoring directions. So in VRC, it's pretty easy to double click and drag to get a vector that you can point to get a good vector for an aircraft. In vSTARS, your quickest is going to be referencing the vectors along the outside to see which direction it is, and this is aligned with magnetic north. The range is basically the scrolling, and I'll show you which range you're looking at, and that when your view is moved away from its center, this will tell you it's off center, and you can click it and it'll bring it back to your center point. And you can place a new center point if you want, instead of scrolling. And you've got your range rings next. You can set to 5, 10, or 20 for the interval. Turn the brightness up here to see that better. So this will change your intervals for the range rings. And the way you do these, you just click, and then while you're clicked, you scroll to change the value. And then you can place the range rings in a different place. By default, they're going to be the radar center for your screen. And if you want to put them somewhere else, you can just click on the range ring center and then click at a new place. And it'll put those in wherever you click. And when you click range ring center, it'll put it back to where they were originally. And then if you click back off of it, it'll return to wherever your custom location was. So the next item is going to be your maps. So ideally, there's kind of some consistency between all of our different Tracons. There are going to be some differences, but this is relatively similar between all of our airports. And kind of a quirk in vSTARS is when you're in one of these sub-menus, your mouse is constrained to the area of the menu until you click done to exit back out of it, so that's a little bit annoying. So the first items here are the video maps for either running the 10s or the 28s. And then the next item you have is the MVA map. And then you have a VFR map that shows some VFR landmarks, reporting points. You can see the rivers and the major highways. So that's something that could be useful for tower. And then EOVM is kind of similar, but it goes further out, and it'll show terrain as well, obstructions, and the locations of different airports. And then you have an airway map. This will show you the different airways and what their names are. And these are the VFR airways for Victor and Tango Airways. And then you have your jet routes for your J Airways as well. So that's a helpful reference if you're looking at a flight plan and getting an aircraft to join one of these airways. And then your next one is the RNAV departure procedure points. And then you've got your SIDS. These are the lava and mini SIDS. And then you have your cascade SID. And then the whammy. And then you have your stars as well. There's the hood coming in from the east. And then the crater and timbers from the north and the south. And you have your RNAV RNP approaches for 10 left, 10 right, and 28 left and 28 right. And then these are your RNAV points for the approaches. And if you're vectoring for the ILSs and the approaches, these are the names of your points, so you can use those in addition to the other diagrams. Then you have your Class C airspace and your Class D airspace, and your runway 31 approach, runway centerline at Hillsborough, most of the other runway center lines for these satellites. And then this one is labels for all of the airports in your area. Sometimes a pilot will be asking for something kind of strange. It might be on this map for you. And then you have your runway 21 line, and then your APDs And one of the settings in that facility is to only show some of these maps if you're in what's called top-down mode. So since STARS is really designed for working with radar targets, it's not going to show you anybody that's on the ground. And so something they've added to help with that is top-down mode. So you do Control-T, it'll put a TDM over here for top-down mode. And that's when your airport diagrams are going to show up in here. And it'll also show you anybody that's on the ground, but we don't have anybody on the ground at the moment. And there may be more maps than show up in the menu at the top. So under Maps, you can click Geo Maps, and it'll show you the list of all the maps there are and which ones you have enabled. And a shortcut to get to any of the maps is to do Control and F2, and then type the number that's shown for that map, and then hit Enter, and it will enable or disable that specific map. Alright, so next we'll talk about the dials. These are added in here to make it more realistic to the real STARS system. Some of them don't do anything since it's just VATSIM, and basically all of the things that you can do with the dials, there are other ways to do it. And so that's why you have that setting where you can turn them off if you don't want to deal with them. So the panel and switch illumination, they don't do anything here. The history and history length, the HIST will change the brightness of the history line for the track, and the history length will show how many previous positions it'll keep in the history line. And then the brightness for your full data block, so that'll only show up when you have an aircraft tagged up. And then your brightness of lists, so this is one of our lists here. It'll change the brightness of those. Your limited data blocks is what shows up when the aircraft is not tracked or it's tracked by somebody else. You can change the brightness of those. We don't have any weather here. There's the position brightness. There's the primary target's brightness. So that's a bit of a distinction that comes in STARS. This blue square rectangle is a primary target. And so it's picking up a primary radar return from this, but it's not getting any secondary return, so this aircraft is squawking standby. And then once they are squawking mode C, then they will show up with the mode C target. And so this is your brightness for all of your other aircraft that you aren't tracking. And so you could turn off your mode C targets if you wanted. And then your range rings brightness, there's an alternate there. And here's where you have your map A and map B brightnesses that you can adjust the two groups. And on the right, the spares don't really do anything. You can change your leader lengths for all of the aircraft. And leader direction will be for the ones that you have tracked. And then these will pan it up, down, left, right. You can change the character size for each of the targets. And you can change the position symbols size. And then range will zoom in and out for you, and then you got your range rings intervals. But since those can be done with other areas, you can turn those off and get a little bit more room on your screen. And continuing up at the top here in this brightness menu, this is where you can change the brightnesses of all of those things that we talked about before. And again, you'll click on it and then scroll to change it and then click again when you're done. And then you have your leader direction here again. And the length, your character size for the various items. And then you will have your preferences. So once you've set things up like you want, you can do a save as, and it'll save it as a new item in here. And then when you already have one loaded, you can click save to save any changes. And then when you press delete, it'll delete whichever profile you have loaded. The next item is the radar site settings. So I think most of our Tracons, especially the major ones, they'll have multiple radar sites set up. And you can use multi-mode. In the real world, there's some details about how the radar data is processed and how it's displayed. Multi-mode, basically all of these targets will point towards wherever the direction of flight is. If you can switch to a single one of any of the different sites. Now all of the targets are going to be facing the radar site, and then the size of the target is kind of the relative size of the target as seen by the radar, which is going to be a little bit larger as it's further away. And that can be a little bit disorienting if this is always pointed towards where the radar is, but the target may be going in a different direction. And then under the shift menu, you have a few more of the options. And then back to the radar, vSTARS is going to somewhat simulate your radar coverage, at least based on the elevation and location of your radar site. So if they're below the radar floor, they're going to disappear from your screen here, which is more realistic to how it would work in the real world. All right, so what you have is the comms panel in VRC. It's called your RDVS in vSTARS. And you can press escape to get rid of it. You press Control and R to get it back. And this is where you control what frequencies you have primed up. Of course, right now it's going to be only your primed frequency and what you're doing over text. But you can right-click on the frequency and change it here. And then headset and loudspeaker if you were setting up the audio in here. And you've got 3 pages of it down here to use if you want. And then another window you're going to have is your text window. So this is where you'll manage your text communications. And most of the commands that are just text commands, they'll work either in this window or the main window as well. And as you have chats with other controllers or aircraft, they'll show up in new tabs here. And then you can close them when you're done with that tab. And you'll see your controller list here on the left of the other people that are logged in nearby. So there's a lot of lists we're not seeing right now because of the screen size. So for example, Portland Tower, this is going to show all the aircraft that are headed for Portland in your range. So you can look in the reference to see how to move these, but it will basically be F7 and then a letter that corresponds to what the type of item it is. And then you'll just click where you want it. So we can move the sign-on list that shows who's signed in, F7TS, and then click where we want that to go. So only I'm signed in at the moment, but you'll see the other controllers that are signed in there. And then each of the submenus up here has been assigned a shortcut key as well. So for example, your off center here, that is also Control and F1, that'll bring you back to it. And then if you press Control and F8, it will hide that menu. So if you basically got everything you need set up here, you can hide it and get a little more screen space even. And that's most of the important interface items. Any questions so far?
I have a question.
Sure.
When you had the text box up, you said you can enter your messages there or in the other. Where is the other than that text communications box?
The other besides that is going to just be your main radar window here. So like when I was typing F7TS, that's popping up over here.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And that's one of the items that you can move around if you'd like to. Alright, so now I'm going to go through some of the common commands that you'd need to know. It doesn't have a nice right-click menu that you can use to do everything pretty easily, so everything that you want to do, you gotta remember the keys and the commands to get that done. So to assign a squawk, you will type F9, and then you can do various things. So you can click on an aircraft, except that one's not tracked yet. So that's one thing that's frustrating about vSTARS. It's more realistic. You don't know who this is. You can't do anything with them. F6 is view the plan. You can't view their plan because you don't know who they are yet. But you can do F9 and then type in their call sign to assign their squawk code. So we've assigned American 1407 1661. So I have it set so that they'll add a flight strip automatically. So this is your flight strip A that you have in vSTARS. If you close it, you can get it back by Control and B. And it works pretty similarly to how it does in VRC. There's not quite as many options here, but you can add a beacon code from here, and you can move it around. You can double click on each of these fields if you want to edit it. So now that I have this aircraft squawking the code they've been assigned, it'll automatically pick up a track on that item. So now this aircraft's moving, you can see a little bit more of the history is pretty dim. So we can brighten that up. You can see that a little bit better. And then you can change the amount of history that's shown. And then if we wanted to drop track on this aircraft, some of these key commands are fairly similar among the different clients. You press F4 and now we've dropped it. But since we had them squawk a code and they squawked that code that we gave them, they are now correlated with that flight plan. So now we do know who they are, even though we're not tracking them at the moment. And so now you can use the F6 to view their plan and click on the aircraft. You'll see their flight plan menu pop up here, and this is where you can edit the flight plan and assign a squawk. And then now that they are correlated, you can press F3 and pick that track back up. And to set a scratch pad text, you can do that on the flight strip. You can type F7 and then Y, and then the text that you want in the scratch pad, and then click on them, and now that'll be alternating with their altitude here.
Can I shoot in one question?
Sure.
I might have missed something, but do you have to select the squawk code yourself, or does it assign one from random or whatever?
It'll do it randomly. So we can pick another aircraft here. You do F9 and then their call sign. And then when you hit enter, it'll give them a random squawk code 1631. And you can also assign one yourself. So you would just do F9 and then Air Canada 485 and then space and then whatever squawk you would want to manually give them.
Matthew,
Yep.
You are coming up with aircraft call signs. I have no clue where you're getting them from.
Yep. So I have the list here that I have connected to the Sweatbox session. I don't know exactly where they are, but it's a good time to talk about the contact me. So if you press home, it'll say contact me. And then if you click on an aircraft, you'll see over here in your text window, it'll say contact request sent to that call sign.
And that's a home key. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Or they would hopefully call you up themselves and you'd be able to type that in. And then next command would be a temp altitude. So for those, you just press plus and then the altitude in hundreds. So I'll put in 3,000 and then click on the aircraft, and now they have a temporary altitude of 3,000. And then there's a couple different ways to show distance and heading on an aircraft. So there is a J ring, so you would type in the star key, a J, and then however many miles you want that to be in radius. And then you'll click on the aircraft, and now we have a 3-mile ring around this aircraft, so that'll help you if you're trying to visualize separation. And then to get rid of it, you'll type in a star and a J, no number, and you'll just click on the aircraft. And similarly for the cone, you'll type in a star P and how many miles in length you want it. And you click on the aircraft, and now you've got the 3-mile cone on it. And then the next item here will be your handoffs and pointouts. So there are several different ways to hand off. You can do F5, your handoff key, and then the ID of the sector. So it'll show up next to the controller's name over here or in your list up here. And then you'll click on the aircraft. There's no position 01 online right now, but it would put them into a handoff to that position. You can also just type in the ID and click on them if it doesn't recognize that as a different command already. And if you want to cancel a handoff, you just do a plain F5 and then click on the aircraft. Or you can type in F5 and then type in their call sign, or you can just click on it. And then if somebody's handing off an aircraft to you, you will just click on it and it'll accept the handoff. So yeah, there we go. So it's flashing now. C means it's tracked by center, and all you have to do is click on it, and now we have the track. And then to hand it off back to center, you type in the key and then their sector ID, and then click on the aircraft. So now it's C47 over here. That means we're waiting on center to pick up our handoff. And then they picked it up. It'll beep and start flashing to let you know they picked it up, and it'll stay white. And then when you click on it, it'll turn back to green. So that is a way that I use to know that the pilot has acknowledged the frequency change and should be going over to the other controller. And if you want to refuse a handoff, you'll just press U and then salute the aircraft. If you want to point out an aircraft to their controller, you'll type in their ID and then asterisk, and then click on the aircraft that you wanted to point out to them. And then if another controller points an aircraft out to you, like with the handoff, just click on it to accept that point out. So that's a point out from center on this aircraft. Flashing yellow, we'll click on it to acknowledge that. And click again and it goes back to green. And another key is to set the voice type. That'll be F9. And then what the voice type should be, and then click on the aircraft. So now this one's text only. And another useful command in here is find, dot find. So you'll type dot find space and then the point that you're looking for, and it'll put a green square flashing at the location of that point. And it'll stay there until you type something else or press escape. And another useful item is the range bearing line. So you'll type a star and a T, and then click the first location, and hopefully you don't get this. So we'll try that again. You do a star and a T, and you click on, you can do any 2 points. You can click on an aircraft and then a point, and it'll show you the heading, the bearing of that location from the aircraft, the number of miles to that location, or yeah, the number of miles, and then that'll be the number of minutes it would take to get there. And then the last item is the ID of the line. So you can have 3 lines, I believe. I don't know why it keeps doing this. But you can have 3 different lines active at once. That's kind of a limitation of the vSTARS. And then so if you wanted to delete one of those lines specifically, you would do a star T and then the number of that line. So we'll set our line back up here. You do star T and then 1. That'll delete line number 1 and not the others. And if you just do a star T, it'll remove all the lines that you have active. And then in a similar way to ERAM, you can set the leader line. If you have 2 aircraft that are getting close, it'll kind of automatically move the line around temporarily, so to try to avoid the data blocks from overlapping each other. But if you want to completely move it, there is the leader direction up here. You can change that for all your aircraft. And you can also type in a number and click on the aircraft, and it'll move the line for that aircraft to a different location. And another helpful item is altitude filtering. So you'll do an F7 and an F, and then it'll be for both tracked and untracked targets. So you can do, you'll type in the filters in hundreds of feet, so you'll have 1,000 to 15,000 for both the tracked and untracked filters here. All right, so now we've set up a filter. That will reject aircraft that are outside of those altitude limits to help clean up your screen a little bit. So if you had on route targets that are above your filter range, or they would be simple targets. You'll also see that filter show up in your system status list here on the 4th line. Below that, you'll find the altimeter settings for your main airports. If you want more details for any airport, you can go to your text communications or the main window and type in .METAR and the airport code, and it will give you the information. And you can set your ATIS code in here. You do F7, S, and then the ATIS code. So now we have an alpha up here for ATIS. And you'll just manually update that when we go to Bravo. And you can also put additional lines of text in there as well. So if there's some other type of information you want to remember, you can add that text up there as well. And then it won't change when you change your ATIS code. So we see our arrival has now disappeared. It's below the filter. It turned into just a basic target, and then it dropped below the radar. It completely dropped off of the screen. And so now we'll type the Control T to go back into top-down mode, and we can see the aircraft on the ground. So another helpful item is bookmarks. Similar to VRC, it's going to be Control and your numbers to access them, and then Control Alt and a number to set it. So I have mine set 1 pretty far out, 2 on the final, and then 3 on the ground. And 4 at Hillsborough, and I don't have a 5, so if I wanted to set 5 at Aurora State here, I would do Control Alt 5, and now I can easily get back to it. And your top-down mode is remembered in here, so it remembers when I go to this bookmark, I'm in top-down mode, and when I go to a different bookmark, I'm not. And so this is your standard view you're going to see when you're zoomed in all the way, and you can see the basic airport diagram and the locations of the aircraft. But at Portland and Seattle, we have an ASDEX map set up as well. So you can type .asdex space and then the name of the primary airport, and it will open an ASDEX view. So we see our arrival there. And most of the items up here don't work, they're just here for realism, but the range you can click on and zoom in and out just like scrolling here. And if you click on the rotate, you can change the rotation here. So you can rotate the map to whatever works best for your screen orientation. And then vector on off, if they're moving here, I'll try to get this guy moving. It will show you their relative speed and direction of travel. And so this is helpful. It shows you a little icon of which direction the airplane's pointing as well. So you now see just a short vector there, and you can increase the relative size of them. And so that shows you its relative direction and speed. And you can change the leader lengths similar to in vSTARS. And you can turn off the data blocks as well if you don't need to know who they are. I think that's most of the functionality here. You also have your entry area over here to use as a command entry as well. So you can come in here, press F6 to view plan, and click on your aircraft. And it'll bring up your flight plan from this window. And this is open in a separate window here, so it's easy to move this to a second monitor if you have one, and you still have your main screen over here you can use for the radar positions. And then another item for the flight strip bay here, if you have an aircraft that's not showing up in your bay that you want to add, you can do .strip and the call sign, and it'll put a strip in there for you. Alright, so there's a pretty decent radar simulation in here as well with some of the more advanced tools that you have. So one thing we have in here is, in addition to the MVAs, there are altitude volumes that it will use to determine if an aircraft is too low, and it'll automatically warn you. So this aircraft is now below the MVA for this area. And we have a low altitude alert going off with a little alarm, and you'll click on it to silence that, but it's still telling you the altitude's too low. And so something you can do, will automatically do sometimes for VFR aircraft, you can suppress that if they're maintaining their own terrain clearance. You can do F7 and V, and then it'll put a little asterisk next to their call sign, and it'll no longer be giving you alerts because of low altitude for them. And then similarly, it will detect conflicts. It'll look kind of similar, except the aircraft will flash with a CA, and you can suppress the conflict alerts with F7 or F11 and then K. And that'll show up as a plus. So, for instance, if you have two aircraft that are maintaining visual separation and you don't want to be hearing about the conflict alerts, you can suppress them for that aircraft. You can also make the main window full screen by pressing Alt and Enter, and the main window will go full screen without the title bar or your system bar at the bottom. And then to get it back your regular window, just press Alt and Enter again and adjust the window as you need to. And then one more item for vSTARS, it has a proxy server built in that you can use for tower view. So in your text window, you just type in start proxy. It'll tell you it started a proxy server. And then you'll go to your flight simulator that you're going to use for tower view. And instead of connecting to a VATSIM server, you'll connect to the IP of the computer that you have vSTARS running on here. And it will be able to see all of the traffic, and it's not going to show your tower view as a client that's actually connected to VATSIM. And that's all of the main material that I had to go over. Anybody have questions or things that they'd like to add?
Matthew, on the proxy server, I use Xplane for tower view. Does that mean I don't have to start XPilot also?
If XPilot is your client, you'll start that. And whatever your client is just instead of connecting to USA West or Central or whatever VATSIM server you would generally connect to, you'll want to connect to the IP of the computer that's running vSTARS.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to throw something in if that's all right.
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
So I think this is more of a general statement about, clients, because obviously vSTARS is, new to some of us, but not so new to some of us. So I would just kind of want to stress the message that get comfortable, practice with vSTARS a decent amount before you actually take it to the live network instead of just blindly going all in with vSTARS. Get it set up, get comfortable with it, and then go on the network with it.
Absolutely. That's a great tip because, I was checking my notes throughout here too. You log on and American 1407 with you on the hood. Oh, geez, how do I assign a squawk again? What key was that? They're expecting a descent. You're trying to look stuff up. So pick a slow time to log on and practice, or practice offline, read through the manual and study that up so you at least know the basic stuff that you're going to need to use pretty well.
Can we come up with a sweat box that we can use for practicing?
That's kind of a thing for the mentors and instructors. They'll run the sweat boxes. I don't think there's really a good way to do that yourself without an instructor or mentor running it.
Okay, and then I run into, I want to learn how to do this, but I don't have any airplanes to do it with.
Yep.
I have to live with that. Okay, I got you.
I mean, you can talk to a mentor and go on Sweatbox and do it. That's fine.
Oh, okay, good idea. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, if you're looking to learn a new client, feel free to reach out and see which of the staff is familiar with it and would be willing to sit down and walk you through it. It definitely helps having somebody that knows what they're doing rather than trying to puzzle it out yourself.
And when I'm observing, is it okay to, can I do anything with airplanes I'm observing as an observer?
It'll be kind of limited.
Okay.
So it treats aircraft that you're tracking differently from aircraft that you're not tracking. So some of the things you could do, like this aircraft, I'm not tracking them anymore, but they're still correlated. I can change the position of their leader line. I could probably add a cone to them. So some of the stuff will work if there's another controller that's been working them.
Is there any way I can screw up the controller that's actually working the traffic?
I'm gonna say maybe, but probably not, because it's not gonna let you do most things unless you're the one tracking the aircraft.
Well,
So
that was another thing. Like if I tried to track the aircraft, would it screw up the controller?
like Center's tracking this one. If I try to track it, it'll just tell me it's an illegal track because somebody's already tracking it.
Okay, thanks. I'm more comfortable with trying things now when I'm observing. Thank you.
And then if you accidentally track somebody that isn't, you just press F4 and untrack them again. But then again, they have to already be correlated, so they'll have to have been squawking the code that they've been assigned so it knows who they are, because otherwise it'll be one of these uncorrelated targets out here. All you know is their squawk code and altitude and speed. And like I said before, the manual is a great place to look. There's a lot of stuff in here that we didn't cover as well. A lot of this is based on each of the function keys been giving a little alias here. And so when you're reading through it, it'll tell you to press multifunction. And so you'll have to remember which of the function keys is that. That's a good resource. And then it will also have, this is your command reference. There's also a controller's guide. And it doesn't have absolutely everything to know. There's a few things I think we went over today that aren't really in here, but it's pretty good at explaining all of the main features and how to use it. So before you're going live with it, this is something that's good to review through maybe a few times to understand how everything works.